Go ahead and bing, bada boom, bada bow, and we can be on the roll. So we're gonna make this quick, so everybody can go on and get back to their good Sunday. What is this? Why is this on? It's not even on. What the?
Could have been your YouTube or something.
No, that's kinky. The tech is wild and crazy. But if y'all are watching with us right now, we welcome you to another episode of Eavesdrop. Thank you for joining us on a Saturday. And before we get started, of course, we are going to do a few housekeeping things so that we can, make this a reciprocal process because we want to hear you all's opinions on this debate, as today we'll be talking about HR-40, which is the bill to create a commission to study reparations, not actually reparations, which is a huge misnomer. But for lack of time, if you can, share the video, please. That always helps. If you can like the video, that also helps, especially for spreading the conversation, trying to get it out there. Also go over to the gildedsages.com where you will find our reaction video to this actual discussion and the hearing that actually took place. We aren't going to be reacting to the actual hearing today, but we'll be talking about HR-40, the details of it, the purpose, and some of the inner workings, and just our overall positions on, how it should be mechanized. Should it be done? Should it not be done? I think I know everybody's position on reparations, but we sometimes disagree with each other.
Yeah.
So
I don't think people get that. Like, no, y'all be agreeing with each other. Like, no, the hell we don't. I won't fight for my point.
It is what it is. But with that being said, yes, please. And what I'll do is, Quan, really quickly before we get started, I'm going to try to copy the actual meeting. What do you call it?
Link.
Yeah, so that you can drop it in the chat in case people want to call in. But while I'm doing that, how was your day today, Cancer? So far before we get started? It's been a long week for myself.
Yeah, but they know how my day been. Errands, saw them earlier. Gonna see them later on this evening. Setting up for a nice little evening with other folks. Nice little dinner. Kind of tired, but I'm gonna have a nap before then. But other than that, I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself over there?
Man, I cannot complain. I'm about to actually go to a seafood sushi party.
What is it
after this?
What is it with niggas and seafood?
I'm not a seafood person.
I am
particularly. I like. No, you know what? Because I like oysters. I like calamari. Octopus, I haven't tried it enough to give a.
They're intelligent, son.
Yeah, they are.
That's like eating dolphin.
It's like eating us.
But we do that. Capitalism, that's how we cannibalize each other, man.
Because capitalism does that. And that is a perfect kind of, no pun intended, for this conversation.
Wink, wink, stump. Let's get Quan in here. How was your day so far, good sir?
Oh, my day's good. Saturday and Sunday are like the relaxed days because, being in that school building, trying to get people to socially adjust and
so that means you took the jab.
had to. I
was hearing something about Montgomery County parents asking the school system for the teachers' records to see if they were immunized. It's like, what kind of issue is this? It's like, that's HIPAA, son. That's a whole government employee. You just can't ask for their information. People out here thinking they got money, so they got power.
Listen, man, it's a whole war between parents and teachers, and it's just like, yo, all I want to do is just educate kids. I don't want no parts of the unions versus the the parents versus the government versus the
They ain't gotta say no more. With that being said, we just gonna jump right into it. We just gonna jump right into it. I'm gonna save you. I'm gonna save you. It's okay. It's okay. I know we on camera. That's
highlight.
But with that being said, we discussed HR-40, so I'm going to go ahead and pull up my screen so that we can actually see the bill itself before we get into it. And this is, again, to address the fundamental injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery in the United States and the 13 American colonies between 1619 and 1865, to establish a commission to study and consider slavery.
Freeman Bureau 2.0?
No, hold on. Consider a national apology. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
A national apology and proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery, its subsequent de jure and de facto racial and economic discrimination against African Americans, and the impact of these forces on living African Americans, to make recommendations to Congress on appropriate remedies. And with that being said, because I just want to touch on that really quickly, in that, because a lot of the rebuttals for reparations is that, well, nobody who owned slaves is alive, or nobody who was in slavery is still here.
They got that money!
This clearly outlines and talks about, look, it is for African American living under these forces today, because as y'all clearly, tried to sweep racism under the rug with Trumpism, calling it Trumpism, but like, no, this is America. This is what we've been trying to tell y'all the whole time.
That wasn't what Trumpism was meaning. You ain't tell me that Trumpism. Y'all need to stop. Y'all know Donald J. Trump ain't invent racism. He ain't even old enough to invent racism. That's it. That's his stock there. He's not old enough. And he ain't the first one. Woodrow Wilson. I'm looking at you, Andrew Jackson.
And so this is just the short title that I highlighted.
Christopher Columbus.
And then I went down to the purpose, which is another big part of the bill, because you want to know, like, why, what's the intent. So the purpose of this act is to establish a commission to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans as a result of the institution of slavery. Institution meaning business, corporate lifespan over time, and including both the transatlantic and the domestic trade, which existed from 1565 in colonial Florida and from 1619 through 1865 with the other colonies that became the United States, and which included the federal and state governments, was constitutionally and statutorily supported statutorily supported the institution of slavery.
Before you go any further, right? That was basically the scope of the discovery that they were proposing to do with this committee. So they want to go from the 16th century all the way up to present. Okay.
And so the de jure and de facto discrimination, and again, one of those is you're talking about the actual legal precedent set that incentivizes a particular behavior, and then you have, hold on, let me see.
The de jure?
Because I sometimes get them confused. Yes, so the de jure is going to be, again, when you're actually just going through the motion, the actual cultural components of the society, where it's not necessarily laws that are in place any longer to support a particular behavior, but because the laws before it created a cycle when we start talking about like gentrification and all of those different things, and people still not being able to get their houses evaluated correctly, that is going to be the residual de jure product of the consequence of policy. So go ahead.
De jure and pro forma, like the business as usual pro forma, is kind of similar, because de jure talks about the legal, but the pro forma talks about the capital and the business part of like, this is business as usual. Because business as usual has gone this way, it continues to go this way.
And that's why I always talk about the trajectory.
Gotcha.
and the implied outcome, because we've seen this before. And
Yeah.
so it says the discrimination against freed slaves and the descendants from the end of the Civil War to present, including economic, political, educational, and social discrimination. And we just gonna jump down some. So these are establishments and duties. One day we should just go ahead and go over the components of the bill.
Yeah, that's what we was kind of talking about off camera. That's more of a seminar format, and in that format, I would like for us to have some RSVPs to the general public, then invite them in on the discussion that we would have. But I would want serious participants.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so with that, I'm gonna just go ahead and, because there's this huge debate going on right now, as we are going to react to, again, the actual hearing itself that took place, led by Sheila Lee Jackson, who heads the committee of the judiciary, which it falls in. So we're going to respond to that. But today is more about, and again, that's going to be on our website, thegildedsages.com. Check out all of the other content that we already have over there, the white papers. We also have other videos. So go ahead and do that for us. But today is more about, for me, the people and the pushback that I'm hearing against reparations for African Americans specifically. I just want to say, one, agree that reparations should be done. And two, on top of that, I don't necessarily think that it should be going through Congress at this particular point. That's a different discussion. I think Biden could do an executive order because of the magnitude and case that is undeniable that it was a human atrocity. Because again, going back to it, it's going from, this thing mentioned the economic depravity going back, and we'll bring up later Black codes, which were other policies that came out of the Civil War that undermined and led to Jim Crow. And so to hear people, for me, push back and say, well, if African Americans get reparations, then what about everybody else? And I also heard via clip, which we are going to try to play for you all, but Obama saying that other people would be upset if we were to get solely reparations, and that's white people, immigrants, and so on. So I want to hear how you feel about that, because for me, this bill clearly outlines the demographic and the experience and the group and the toll that we're talking about. And so how I don't necessarily understand how a person could take it as offensive and say that they are in allyship, and then a person also seeing it as xenophobic from the immigrant standpoint, in terms of us, the bill excluding other demographics and focusing in on African Americans specifically.
Okay. So HR-40 itself, and this HR-40 wanting to establish a committee to study the impact of chattel slavery 246 years, reminds me of the Freedman Bureau at the end of 1865, which did its best to offer the formerly enslaved a new way to be integrated into the Union. And what we have to establish there is that a lot of people are the hidden races, which is socially liberal but fiscally conservative, because that's what made the Freedmen Bureau fail the first time. The North ran out of money. And so with this commission, what has to be established is that, one, chattel slavery, the English didn't create it, but they stole it from the Portuguese, the Spanish, and so forth. So there's a whole lot of, when we start talking about Florida, we talk about the Spanish. When we talk about Louisiana, we're talking about the French. And that's why you got Creole culture. Then when we get into South Carolina got their slave codes from Barbados. So that goes in the Caribbean with Jamaica. But the difference between Jamaicans and Black Adolphs is that the English did not have landowners that oversaw the plantations in Jamaica, because Jamaica was really hot at the time, but they had really violent overseers. So there was more of a fight back then. But coming more contemporary, this bill would have to establish a pipeline for professionals. I look at the Chronicle of Higher Education, in which, I don't know if you're familiar, but Dr. Cornel West has been rejected tenure to Harvard. And being rejected tenure to Harvard, he was already tenured at Harvard before, tenured at Princeton. He's a world-renowned scholar, but the fact that they was going to offer him 10 years in a departmentship is kind of smack in the face for someone of his caliber, especially a public intellectual and world scholar of his caliber. But Scotland offered him a position, and this is where I see with HR-40. It's like the Monahan report. It's like the Kerner report. We constantly get these reports about the state of poverty in Black America. And let's even continue to Dr. William Julius Wilson, who talks about the underclass and talks about how there is a cultural, economic component that money cannot resolve when we start talking about the legacy of chattel slavery. You cannot simply believe that the money is going to resolve the problem. And that's for some people like, oh, so you're against reparations. Like, no, reparations is the very beginning because we need at least the money to begin to heal. We need the money so that we don't have to, so we can slow down. People think cash in hand. In America, capital, because most of these people who have these inflated networks don't have the cash in hand. They have the cash in bonds and all these different things. We didn't get the Homestead Act. We were borrowed from it. We were borrowed from the GI Bill. So
we were borrowed from everything.
We were borrowed from all of it. And then if you look at the transatlantic slave trade, just look at the things that we were trading. We were growing. Sugar. It's the first cocaine. Coffee. Cotton.
You got
rice.
I was about to say
I
rice.
heard we grew hemp.
We grew hemp. Tobacco. We picked tobacco.
I was about to say that's what I was thinking about.
Tobacco.
I was about to say cigarettes.
So all of the things and the commodities that the West became wealthy upon, we harvested. Mm-hmm. So when someone says reparations to me, and I'm gonna get up from behind the podium, it's like reparations isn't necessarily reparations as much as reconciliation. We must reconcile 246 years. We must reconcile what happens and what was taught within those 246 years by at least giving us enough time outside of, because we all know we still gonna keep working. Even if they gave us everything we needed, we still gonna keep working because we know that they can take at any given time. That's a paranoid Black mind. It's like what you got, you can take from it at any given time. At any given time. So again, my position is reparations is actually the reconciliation of America, it's economic inclusion, and more importantly, we can start having a conversation about poverty in America instead of racialized poverty, as Dr. Phil Jackson puts it, genderalized racism.
You said, help me understand the last part a little bit better in terms of genderized and racialized poverty.
Racialized poverty is when you get into the slave, when we get to 1619, you're in Virginia, you got three indentured servants that escape, two of them white, they get time, but the other one is necessary, he's Black, so he's enslaved permanently. He no longer has his freedom. That's racialized, that's when you get the racism system in America. You get the stigmatization of pigmentation. Mm-hmm. But we got to understand that there's always been poor whites in America too. At least even Alexis de Tocqueville acknowledged that. So when you talk about that, we begin to talk about poverty when you remove the race component, because people like to overcome race by saying class. It's like, no, it's not that simple.
And so you're basically saying, if I hear you correctly, you have to deal with the race issue and reconcile on that before you can move to the class issue.
Before you can move on to the class issue, because that will tell you what was actually race and what is actually class.
And you know, I agree with you on that 100%, because I think what a lot of people misunderstand when they talk about, because another issue, another rebuttal that I often hear is that, you know, it's a class issue, not a race issue. And my disagreement in it is, to your point, in that it's not necessarily that class doesn't exist in America, but I think people have to begin to understand that race was the first class system in America. And until you deal with the first layer of class that we have, you can't get to the traditional and how people come into traditional classism, because that's not how America operates. Because like you said, when you talk about the pigmentation, your pigmentation is always going to be locked in. And I think what people do with that, because and this is where I think the implication in them doing that is very disrespectful. And I think Larry Elder went on to that point to talk about, exceptionalism, being hardworking, and that stigmatization with African Americans specifically in America is that we're lazy. And like these groups of people have quote unquote matriculated in America. Why haven't you all? And I think what people forget is, like you said, you're not dealing with the psychological, social, and economic traumas, because it's easy to say, oh, well, they just don't work hard enough. I think I always use the example of a person reading a book, right? People always love to say, well, Black people don't read, blah, 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 blah. Okay. I think it's a gross generalization. I would love to see numbers, because people always want numbers until it's something about an African American. But even if I was to take that, right? My thing is, did you ever think, though, that a person doesn't read books? Because we know, epigenetics, which talks about how you can pass down traumas. From that, with that being said, it was outlawed that a person couldn't read and that you would suffer death. So you have to then teach your child that same law and rule if you're trying to keep that kid to survive.
So
over time, when you have when you do get some access, you get dilapidated schools, you get dilapidated books, and all of those other things. That's the cost of it, though. Even if that is true, that's the cost of it. Because even if that is true, we can say that about America as a whole, just being anti-intellectual. But you can go ahead to your point, though.
Yeah, but because about the Black people don't read and everything else, and Black scholars. That's why I love Dr. Philda Jackson. I'm gonna keep mentioning her name about it with gender racism, because you can look at even affluent Black women, they still have higher rates of heart disease because they're not paid attention to. So it's added stress to their life, because they may have the money to take care. Because we know the Democratic Party, I'm looking at y'all. Y'all love to say Black women. Y'all love to say give them high paying jobs. Stacey Abrams is
overwork them.
Basically to overwork them, because they don't want to do the work themselves. They give them the grunt work, like they did just now with the acting chief of the Capitol Police, having her apologize for plans she did not draw up. My point is that when you remove that argument, it's a caste, and you gotta recognize that it's a caste system in America, and Black and Native American is a part of it. I bring the Native American because of the historical land position, but we got to understand America started off as trading companies for Europe. It was started I can't make this shit up. The Virginia trading company.
And remains to be.
The Massachusetts Bay Trading Company. So the myths that America likes to propagate and purport are dispelled by a lot of things that Black Americans talk about. And even Skip or Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. I love using America's institutions against itself. It talks about how the exceptionalism is a white supremacy thing, how material wealth is a white supremacy thing. And if you buy into it, then you just follow in Booker T. Washington and the machine. And so what we have to do as Black Americans, before we get a Larry Elder, who's a libertarian, to speak for us, we got to start telling white people another element of your racism is your parentalism. You think you need to tell us what Black experts we should listen to, but you don't know a goddamn thing about Black life. So when Black people tell you that person doesn't speak for me, it's not your job for you to come to us and say, well, maybe you should listen. It's like, maybe you should shut the fuck up. And when we say they don't speak for me, they don't speak for me. That's who makes you comfortable. That is not who makes me comfortable. Because they're talking about keeping money in your pocket and telling me that I need to strive harder, when we know education is also tied to neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are also tied to food security. Food security is also tied to economics. You want to separate these things and like, oh, we got the achievement gap. Well, you got an achievement gap because you got a child who ain't getting food at home. And you got an achievement gap because you got a mother that got to work 3 jobs just to pay rent. And she going into debt just to feed the goddamn kid. Then you got all these different things that you don't want to take into consideration, because in your little GI Bill suburban neighborhood, the government made sure they subsidize enough so that you can have it. Keep taking corporate debt home and telling me it's income. Sounds like welfare to me.
Man, you said a lot, and that was spot on. But you also said something in there that I think is very important too, in terms of people thinking that one, reparations is just checks in hand. It is much bigger than that, and I think people miss that and do themselves a disservice. Because I think one of the things that white immigrants as well as black immigrants, POCs, should all understand is that if in fact you do not make America account for that sin, like you said, the economic system, the pro forma, business as usual, the trajectory that we're on, the trajectory that we're on, and the vehicle and how the vehicle is powered. Everything is about cutting costs to get and drive profit. And then what that does though is it brings us to a point where you exploit labor. Once we're done, somebody else has to come in and undergird the bottom. They're going to completely die off because again, nobody is stopping it. And we're the only people who can actually, the only group that can actually bring that claim as a group, which is also why it can't be exactly like legally credible, which is also exactly why it can't be just black, because blackness, the way that it has been redefined in contemporary time, speaks to black people all across the world. When people must understand that race creation and in its inception, when it was first started, you have to understand it was meant and used to cultivate a particular group of people, which is why you have white people, which also does not exist. But those two identities do not exist.
I'm telling you, James Baldwin says it all the time. I don't believe in white people, that's why I don't believe in black people, but racism is big business in America, and it's not just
it was the people. First business.
It's not just white people who benefit from it. And Dr. Cornel West talks about this even on the Joe Rogan show. He talks about how race is more than just white supremacy. He talks about how it's just beyond white people. That's why I'm at this point in time, I'm befuddled. I'm befuddled and I'm flabbergasted and gobsmacked, like, oh my pearls. It's like, well, how long is it going to take for us to understand that an economic system that was based upon a caste system of rendering people 3/5, not just for population, but for the racialized science of eugenics, to say that you are not viable enough to partake in the economic system because you are a commodity and you're not an actual being. And what I love, Sir Joshua Bennett, I got the book downstairs, I'll show it to you, probably one of my own. He has this term and I use it all the time. Please go to gildedsages.com. I am talking about the white paper, social capitalism, flood the capital, drain the opportunity. When he talks about a psychological onslaught, it's a psychological onslaught of being black. And when we separate it as a black man, you're told the only thing you're worth is your strength. You're not worth your feelings. You're not worth anything else other than what you can endure. And when I don't like about, yeah, I'm a real nigga and all everything else, it's like, nah, son, don't have me out here enduring things that I should not have to endure. I should not have to tell my son he has to watch out because the police may be angry and that's his life. I shouldn't have to, because there was a time in which a black man can get lynched by looking into a white woman's eye or a black man's eye or not getting off the sidewalk. When we start talking about rape culture, we need to talk about the number of white women. Bill Barr talked about it, the number of white women who said that the sex was no longer sensual, and how many black men lost their lives and had their necks snapped from the hypersexualization of black men. Like, don't be coming to me talking about hoes and this, all the things, like that's a little boy game. And I'm gonna sit and say it's a little boy game. When we start talking about these politics, we talking about real shit. We talking about communities. And you can't have no community if you talking about this woman and that woman and this woman and that woman. Then this is where I kind of agree with Burry, but then Burry took it to a whole nother level and he tried to put some swag on it. It's like, you don't have to talk down towards this. That's that Bill Cosby. That's why when Bill Cosby went down for the Quaaludes, it was like, fuck you, Bill.
Send you on your way.
Send you on your way. Him, Hill Harper, you let us know young brothers like Hill Harper, I haven't seen you do a goddamn thing. Ta-Nehisi Coates, you started something, but now you doing something with Marvel.
Off of it.
Marvel, because it was about the money and the exposure. I got more respect for Coleman Hughes, who remains in the lane, talking about the social justice issues, although I don't necessarily agree with all his points. I respect his scholastic ability to do that than Ta-Nehisi Coates coming behind Toni Morrison, who laid a lot of groundwork for him, but is not upholding that tradition. It's like you're not upholding tradition, so I can't give you the quote unquote cultural cachet or clout that you want.
Mm-hmm.
I'm coming from behind the podium. It's the Manhattan. Blame it on the alcohol, y'all.
But I think what people have to understand is that, you know, not one that is anti-African American. We see again people.
It's anti-America though.
Name
people
one
damn
thing. Don't see it that way though.
We gonna make them see it. Name one fucking thing that's American that don't have black skin in it. I'll fucking wait. Yep, I'm taking everything to get it. I'll wait. Name one thing that ain't got a docky in it in America. Because Mammy even had to be there to make sure that she could pop her titty out to make sure that the white child ate. There's wet nurses everywhere. Milk siblings is a real thing. Let me know.
The CEO suite.
The CEO suite? Who cleans it? The janitors. They used to be black. And guess what? The only time you saw a nigga in the suit was a butler. I'll wait. Let me know one thing in America. Give me one thing in America where there ain't a docky next to it. Because I know you're lying. Because we was in Europe too. Talking about the old corruption with the sons of Africa. We was there too. We've been trading with Europe for centuries. Let me know. I'll wait. I just need another drink.
I don't know.
Man, we built
Don't fucking exist. We've always been there.
I agree. No, I agree 100%.
Since Henry the Navigator, we've been there.
And I think that's why it's so insulting to hear people or try to accuse someone of being xenophobic for making that exclusion when we're talking about an experience. And
people like to conflate shit. But
they do. And my biggest issue with that is sometimes I don't know if the conflation is due to malice because you're trying to erase, or are you just ignorant and don't understand? I know
you know where we at.
I know some people just are malicious in that way and they want to co-opt the narrative, because you can't tell me on one day you agree with Biden, passing an immigration bill, basically fast tracking the naturalization process of 11 million undocumented citizens.
Which comes from the 14th Amendment.
And so with that, again, all things that we as African Americans have put people in a position to even be able to call this place a home. And part of the thing with reparations is I don't think people get that, like, look, when you have reparations and when you have such a bill that is going to put a hefty amount on the budget of America, what it allows is a restructuring of how we engage with the foreign community too. And I think that's what people also forget, because it's like people are like, oh, well, how are we going to pay for it? And You can pull money from a bunch of different places. One being, I heard they just bombed Syria. Mm-hmm. So, like, again,
the defense budget.
Again, when you redirect that money, that allows for communities who do have, or who are immigrant communities abroad, it will allow them to not have their communities destabilized by your very own. That's funny, son. Because again, we know how they move. And that's the whole thing. Like, people acting like we living in this world where we don't understand that we're being censored. We're living in an America that is still reaching far and wide and just completely disregarding everybody. And so it's twofold. It's like, look, we need you to stand strong where you are, because everybody's thing is like, oh, well, I'm gonna go to Africa and I'm gonna go to this place, go to that place. If y'all haven't been paying attention, the whole world is in an uproar right now. And what? Because CA came on here and told us about the thing in Tigray, Tigray over in Ethiopia, where it's everywhere. Then we saw the SARS. Then we saw the SARS stuff.
Nigeria.
We saw the Yellow Jackets. We saw.
Yellow Jackets was France, wasn't it?
I believe so.
But France, like, they like to turn up. So.
Over and what was it? Not Hong Kong. Was it Hong Kong?
Yeah, Hong Kong. They still fighting. So
like,
this is not the news cycle.
Y'all think y'all gonna go win?
But that's but it goes back to Marcus Garvey and this whole thing about let's escape back to Africa. And I always tell people, now this is intra-cultural amongst the African diaspora. Like that shit ain't safe either. Europe ain't got no Camelot. Africa ain't no Camelot. It ain't perfect, man. It wasn't perfect before they came. And that's what a lot I don't like about the black people being racist. Yeah, I said black people being racist. Because it's like everything that's wrong with black people is blamed upon white people. Everything that's wrong with the black community is blamed. And white people didn't. It's like, no, you just an asshole.
Because sometimes we have to admit that we perpetuate. That is a crutch that I hate.
It's a crutch.
It's a crutch that
but it's a lot of dubious people who use it.
Because they know use it. Because there are some things that they are responsible for, as we talked about earlier again, when we talk about how the de facto plays on the de jure and had a residual outcomes. But
it's some dubious creatures. But let me get back to this. Let's reframe the conversation then. And reframing the conversation about HR-40 and taking into consideration what's established committee, shouldn't this be a way for HBCUs to get money?
Yeah, it would. For me, it would include all of that, because when you talk about education, for me, there would be parts of the bill that requires schools nationwide from every different level to teach history from the perspective of the slave, and teach it with utmost accuracy in the same way that people are held to that standard when we talk about how people have to talk about Jewish heritage. I think that those two things coincide, and that when you talk about education, like it goes there, then it does go to, we're now marking dollars specifically for HBCUs. We're now, again, I think the college student loan debt forgiveness, for me, should be a benefit that you can build into reparations and make it specifically for African Americans. Why?
Because we default higher rates.
We defaulted higher rates, and because we were stripped of the wealth. Because like you said, white people are not in these positions because of their race. It is because of your class. But you all are not
caste.
Exactly. Yeah, you can move through the caste with labor because you're still a part of the dominant structure. So for me, people are like, oh no, you should. Yes, because what happens is you don't understand, if you give student loan debt forgiveness to everybody, like I said in the last video, you don't know their political ideology, one, and they could very well be the person who's trying to roll back stuff. Two, you also are not accounting for how a person has accumulated that debt, or as to why. Because some people just take out those loans because they can. Some people will have stuff subsidized and their parents can still pay for it, and then you get transfers from family. And so all of those things are very different. And because also what came out in the data with the education student loan forgiveness piece of it is like, look, for most Black African American people, especially, even if you did 50,
that would be
one, it wouldn't be enough. And two, for African Americans specifically, we're only going to college at a 12% rate anyway. So you're not impacting us as a group. You're looking at it as Black people or POC at large. That doesn't work. You're bolstering your numbers.
Okay, yeah, they do, because they also include Northern Africans as white, and we all know that Northern Africans aren't treated as white, and a lot of them are Arabs or Berbers. But that's how the census is inflated. Another point, because I'm not in no rush to get off this, because the scope in which they're talking about is fucking huge.
Huge.
The scope is, oh my, 246 years. Kentucky was not the same as Tennessee. Tennessee was not the same as South Carolina. Georgia was not the same. These are all different places. Alabama was not the same. When we're talking about HR-40, we're talking about establishing a committee, we really need to be talking about going to very robust, scholastic R1, moving HBCUs schools up from R3 to R1. That's like going from D3 to D1. Research schools when it comes down to the funding, and the endowments need to be there. So we need to have a lot of Black scholars, because to Professor Deborah Gray White's point, y'all ain't gonna get me talking about I don't love Black women. I love Black thought. And Black women always got some smart shit to say because they actually smart. So I listen. Oh, I'm gonna love it. Docs me. But my point is, Deborah Gray White talks about being matter out of place, meaning that you exist in a space that you're not supposed to exist in. I'm going to take Professor Deborah Gray White. I'm going to take Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, the mother of intersectionality? Are we going to take Professor Nina Banks, who talks about the Black family structure and the racism that Black women have faced and now an imprisonment of Black men that took them away from Black women? Are we going to talk about Professor Michelle Alexander and the new Jim Crow? All of their testimonies are going to go inside of this to combat the Ta-Nehisi Coates and the Coleman Hughes and the Melvin area elder. Are we going
they were her property.
They were her property. I forgot Stephanie Roger Jones, Dr. Stephanie Roger Jones. Are we going to add their testimonies in it? Because I read their work. Please include their work. I want their work included because it's more nuanced. It has the scholastic ability to stand up to it. Dr. Philip Jackson, who's inside of public health, and it talks about how Black women have higher rates of heart disease as well as Black people have higher rates of cancer, because we need economic, environmental lawyers to come in as well, because the zoning used to be industrial slums of Black people. So if we're going to talk about this scope, and people think, oh, this was the 1800s. No, bring in the 1900s too, because the KKK at their rise was in the 1920s and the 1910s.
Yep.
The birth of the nation came in 1950. Y'all think this shit is old. It's not. It's not that old. My mother was alive when X was alive. When King was alive. It's not that damn old. We can touch people who went through it.
It's grown like what, 87?
87. She came in the 30s. So it's not that old. My point is that if they're establishing a legacy, are we going to hear those women that the Democratic Party says that we should save testimony? Are we going to actually hear Black women's testimony? Are we actually going to hear Black women's testimony? I'm going to ask it again. Are we actually going to hear Black women's testimony?
Hold on. That just made me think of another point. Mind you, people, that this is being done in this manner because, again, y'all going to be able to check out the reaction video to the hearing this week that we're going to upload on the website. But mind you, this is all being done when the Democrats, when we have the House and the Senate, we have
and the White House. And
so understand how much leverage you have around picking and creating a panel or commission, and you have, I wouldn't say full and complete control, but you have immense leverage.
A lot leverage.
And so it being done and being casted and being allowed to have a lot of, from what I heard, it was lopsided in terms of people who oppose versus people who support. And the people who oppose didn't really have any, again, because I don't necessarily mind you opposing. I do. But if you're going to oppose, at least have some type of
alternative.
Not only an alternative, but back it up with factual data and stuff like that.
Anyone in the data can tell you that it doesn't exist.
And that's the problem.
It doesn't exist.
And so
it does not exist.
For me, I immediately go to, no, this was malicious, because it's not really a thing that should be argued. Because like I said earlier, Joe Biden could just make it so, because it is not really a discussion. It shouldn't be a discussion if we should get reparations. I do agree with the commission. Joe Biden could just say, all right, no, it is. We have a commission. This is how we're going to do it. This is the set-asides. All of that could be done in a swipe of a pen. So the whole argument around, oh, let's see it move through it doesn't have to be done that way. Because again, this bill is just to study reparations, study the atrocities. And like, to your point, Black women are not going to be heard. They're never heard. And so the unfortunate thing about that is that, like you said, people are very happily fine with them being in mules that can do the work and get them over the actual hump. But as I tell Black women, look, stop being their backbone. Tell them, fuck them. Because guess what? Let me step in the gap and we can have a real conversation, man to man. Because Joe Biden, how dare you say anything? Because you took part in hand. We didn't even get into Jim Crow, war on drugs. I watched the crack documentary.
Maxine Waters, we got to come at her neck too for that shit. And I'll shout them in Jesse Jackson too for that shit. It's like, no, as a 90s baby, I got beef with y'all. That's why I'm like,
because they still perpetuate.
I'm like Tupac, son. Like, yo, it's easy for me to be neutral. Because people back and forth. Like they're scared of the youth because the truth looks strange. But that said, we also gotta come back and stop allowing the people who are personality over politics to be in our circle.
I agree.
It's like you're not in my circle because I have LGBTQIA plus people in my circle who are not being served by people who are part of their community and purport to be a part of their community. And I know how hard it really is to be Black and trans, to be Black and gay, because the world don't give a fuck about you. Because I'm from DC, I used to remember when they didn't call them trans and they were all on K Street.
But you know, even me with the Black LGBT community,
Yeah.
I tell people, look, I'm not against it, but my thing is, look, at least make the other community, the white part or the POC part, however you want to subdivide yourselves, because y'all have subdivisions, which is my whole point, because they don't treat everybody equally. And that's where I throw away identity politics, because it's like everybody has, every group has their sellouts.
Until McFadden's was the best place to show this. Until you see one of the baddest South Asian women go for one of the sloppiest white frat boys, you don't understand how bad it is. It's like, nah, son. If she conservative and that family money matter and that family money comes in, she's gonna be worried about your job and your heritage, especially if you're Black. She's really gonna be worried about your heritage. I get what you're saying about Joe Biden with the executive order to study, but I really want, because we know where we are, we're in this swamp. I want liners. I want lines, no semicolons, full stops. We know how important those semicolons are, those exceptions. They get real tricky with that vague language. I want it plain and simple. Where the money, because you can have this commission be passed and it goes to PWIs to study it. Princeton is no stranger to having award-winning historians who are white win from Black history. Yale is no different than that either.
They should be disqualified, honestly, because people.
I don't say disqualified.
I'll say disqualified because
I wouldn't say they should study us. How about this? Because I'm feeding to your point. Because Professor Deborah Gray White talks about how when Black people are studied by white scholars. I shouldn't say they should be prohibited, because in prohibiting people, it's easy to shoot that down as a red poison pill. But I do believe that we should be the head of the studies.
I would agree. And the only reason I was going to correct myself and say certain institutions, only because if you had a hand in slavery, because this is another question that I constantly get from people about what we should do about reparations and how the money would come up with. It's like, look, not only is America being sanctioned companies, because there are articles where you have Harvards and other schools who've actually built their wealth off of slavery. So like, if you didn't partake in that, I'm not saying be
I get you saying
exempt, but if you partook as an institution in slavery, no. You
didn't wipe out all the Ivy League schools.
And again, but again,
he didn't wipe them all out.
I think that again, if y'all want to be these fake liberals and fake allies,
don't come from social justice Democrats.
You should be okay with that, because again, you partook. Like, how are you going to make money in any way?
So you saying they should not be able to bite from the tree again?
No.
Gotcha. The forbidden fruit.
Because you should be getting sanctioned. Let alone be able to come in and make money tenfold, because you've already made money off of it. Yeah. Tenfold. And now you're about to make money off of the solution to it. No, that's a problem. Because that's been a problem.
Your face is like, this is bad. But that goes to Malcolm X and white liberalism, and how when it's a Black movement, a white liberal comes in and take over organization, but put the Black people in front of it.
And so before we head out, because we going, again, check out, like the video, share the video, leave a comment, let us know what you think, let us know what type of content you want to see. And again, check out the reaction video, which will be uploaded this week to the website, thegildedsages.com. But before we do that, Quan, what you think about this whole deal, man?
So for me, when you look at the reparations discussion, like a lot of the talking points that people have against reparations, to me, it's just a juvenile way of arguing. Like you in sort of a classroom, like, okay, if you give this student something, you have to give everybody. It's like, no, when are we going to not be in high school no more?
Well, I've been asking that shit.
What if we not gonna be in high school no more?
That's
Like,
really poignant.
like for me, it's like we have so many discussions around restorative justice and intersectionality, and it's like, yo, if we're not going to tackle any root issues in these discussions, then I don't want to hear them. I don't want to hear them because everybody can look up anything about poverty and its effects, and you can see who the people are that are in poverty, and you can see where all of these things feed to a school to prison pipeline, a racial wealth gap. You can see all of these things, but still conclude that certain groups don't deserve more.
Yeah.
How? How could you be for?
Because I'm human.
But how could you be for all of these things, social justice? How can you be for intersectionality? But as soon as it intersects with poverty and the people who deserve their restorative justice, you could be for all these buzzwords, but when the rubber meets the road, you could just be like, oh, fuck them.
I'm glad you said that. Maintenance. How many people want a Benz or BMW but don't want to pay the maintenance bill? America don't want to maintain this.
Nope, they ain't gonna let us stop. But with that being said, man, everybody go ahead, hit the button, hit it one more time, hit it again.
Tell your friends about us.
And check out our website, man. And again, as I always say, if you want to help us do some of this work, reach out. You see our emails at the website as well.
We're gonna come out with some merch. You see, I'm rocking the nigga boy. Rocking it.
And then also
ideology over identity.
All day, every day. Because that's what all these conversations is about, man. The book is over there too as well.
Yeah.
And with that being said, if you want to help in terms of like activism in any way, you don't want to necessarily be a Democrat, you can head on over here as well. And if you don't mind that, I'm also the VP of DC Young Democrats. And so also come in that way, because we are definitely going to need all the assistances out here to do and bring these things to fruition that we're talking about. Because I ain't trying to be talking about all of this for 80 years of my life. We trying to get some results so we can
try to be the boys.
For what? That's part of the problem is, man, people made a